3 seconds.
This is the heavy lifting part of the meeting.
Right, exactly. All right, Mr. Chair, you are indeed live.
Thank you. A quorum of commissioners are present, and so I would like to call the meeting to order. Those who are present have agreed that we should go ahead and begin in a timely fashion. Ms. Consoli, if you would call the roll, please.
Dr. Scott,
Present.
Mr. Cummins,
Present.
Mr. Groft,
Present.
Mr. Greeley,
Present.
and so far
Okay.
we do not have the other three,
actually-
but we have 4 present.
Actually, hold on. Mary Bannon is here as well. She's coming
Oh.
forward right now.
Okay,
Oh.
good.
Sorry, I'm here.
Well, I'm glad you're here. So
Okay.
Commissioner Bannon is here. Let's enter that onto the record, please.
Yes, sir.
Okay, our first item of business is something we have delayed because of the lengthy nature of some of our recent meetings and public hearing sessions. Has everyone present read the minutes that were distributed?
Yes.
Everyone else? Just signify by raising your hand.
Yes. Yes.
Okay, good. So we'll begin with the minutes from November the 12th, 2024. Are there any additions or corrections to those minutes? Seeing none, is there a motion to approve them as submitted?
So I move.
Second,
I second.
movement to approve as submitted, made and seconded. All in favor, signify by saying aye.
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 Thank you. Our next delayed minutes are for December the 10th, 2024. Again, I ask everybody has reviewed them. Okay, are
Yes.
there any corrections or amendments?
Nope.
Seeing none, is there a move to approve them as submitted?
I move that we approve the minutes as submitted
Is there a
Or
second?
Second.
for December 10th, 2024.
Very good. So motion moved, made to approve and seconded. All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
Okay, those are approved. The next set of minutes is for January the 23rd, 2025. Everyone's read them. Are there any additions or corrections? Seeing none, is there a motion to approve them as submitted?
Motion
Motion
to
to
approve
approve.
is submitted.
Motion by Mr. Cummings, seconded by Ms. Bannon. All in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Motion's passed and minutes approved. And let's see. The next set is for February the 27th, 2025. Everyone's read them. Are there any additions or corrections? Seeing none, is there a motion to approve as submitted?
Motion to approve.
Motion by Mr.
Seconded.
Cummings, seconded by Mr. Greeley. Any last minute discussion or corrections? Seeing none, all in favor signify by saying aye.
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 The motion to approve passes. And let's see, our last set are for March the 11th, 2025. And that was a rather
I
lengthy-
actually, I don't know how much it matters, but I mentioned to something about Kimberly when she sent those out and she corrected it, but the file that's in the shared link is not the updated version, but it really doesn't matter. It was, they mixed up Mr. Groft and Mr. Greeley. And I don't think that really matters in the grand scheme of things, but
Well, what is it that they
Kimberly
mixed
did
up?
update it.
I
Oh,
had
it is updated.
I had corrected the attendance by one member that arrived late, but I had put in the draft minutes the wrong member. Mr. Cummins pointed that out. I corrected it. However, Sherry didn't get that in your meeting folder for tonight. So we could.
But I think the corrected one was sent out. I don't know. I
I
don't
did
know how
send out a
it really
revised
matters. I don't want to
draft.
make a big deal
Yeah.
about it, but
I sent out a revised draft, but it may not have gotten tonight's Google Drive meeting folder for
Okay.
you to look at one last time.
Yeah, I don't think I saw that, but this is exactly why we go through this sort of perfunctory part. It is important that we have that recorded correctly for the record. So, Kim, you've got that, and you will correct that,
I have,
And-
right. Mhm.
and please send it to us at our next meeting in April.
Okay.
So we will not act on those minutes at this time. Okay?
Yes, sir.
All right, very good. So we've completed that part. And now we'll move on to our work sessions. If the pre-app representatives would be promoted and John joins in. I know he's here because I saw him, right? Didn't I
Yeah,
see
we
John?
don't- Yeah, John was here. It looks like John may have fallen off.
I do not see a John on here.
Yeah, I saw him briefly on my screen. I think we need to have him participate.
He was here, but it looks like he may have lost signal or keep an eye out for him.
Ms. Mulligan, I'm very sorry this seems to happen every time you come before us.
Okay.
Um,
Listen, while we wait, I'd be very grateful if Julian could drive my slides for me. I fear I will mess it up if I try to share screen.
I don't have them. Are you able to send them to me really quick while we wait for John?
I sent them to Sherry. Oh dear.
You send them to Sherry. Okay.
Well, if needs be, my slides, which are really start with a photo montage of the condition of the bulkhead over the past several years. I hope you all have those slides.
no, we don't get those slides in advance.
Oh, Sherry told me they were in your phones.
I didn't see any. I'm sorry. That could be me. You know.
there are several documents here. Like there's I see the application, I see the wave brush spec sheet, I see the Blue Oyster environmental, I see the flooding and changes in bulkhead
Thank you.
2020 to 2024.
That
and
is what
I
I'm
see,
referring to.
Oh, okay. My mistake then. I
titled
overlooked-
OB number 1 HPC flooding charts 2525 and questions.
Yes,
Yeah.
the flooding charts were what I was referring to.
Can
Good.
you share your screen, Cecil?
That might be the easiest way.
Yeah,
Yeah, I don't mind. It is in a shared folder. I don't know if the tech person has access to the shared folder, but I do not mind sharing my screen. if that's
I'd be
about
very
what-
grateful if you would.
Yeah, and Cecil, I do not have, I don't have access to your guys' internal folders.
That would be good. Thank you, Cecil.
Yes. And let me say, first of all, thank you for giving us the time again tonight. And I want to say we've taken several actions from the last meeting and we're still working them. So this is not our response to suggested actions from that time. But there were several questions and a few issues raised last time that I thought merited a fuller answer than I had materials for that night. Some of these are mainly pictures, so I don't think I'm going to belabor them and take up too much of your time to go through them. But I have with me Joe Berg from Biohabitats, who is the designer of our current design. And so between the two of us, the issues we were going to address tonight was in my package, it is an expansion to the question of is there erosion behind the bulkhead? We'll speak to that. In my backup charts, which I won't necessarily go through unless you want me to, we were asked, what have we presented in the past, documenting the flooding potential? All of that material is back there, the relevant ones, so you didn't have to go through all the other presentations we've made to HPC, because since the design has changed 3 times, it'll get really confusing. And then Joe has material on, we've asked questions about how is the oyster reef going to be established? Where will it be placed? What's the material? I told you last month that it wasn't necessarily going to be the oyster brick that was described in there. In fact, Joe will update on that. And then Joe will also show a little bit on our current thinking on what the planting plan is going to be. And I think, and I want to tell you, it's truly preliminary. I mean, Joe and I aren't in perfect agreement yet, on the plan, but I think you'll understand once you see the flooding charts, the fact that the situation is dynamic and why we are constantly refining. So Cecil, if you would be kind enough to bring up the flooding charts, I'd be grateful.
And Mr. Chair, I just want to make sure you saw John Tower has now rejoined the meeting as well.
Yes,
Mhm.
yes. We cannot proceed without Mr. Tower.
Mhm.
And before you begin, just for the record, since this is being recorded, you as the applicant, Ms. Mulligan and Mr. Burke, understand that this is only a review to come to some guidance to you about concerns that the commissioners have, and nothing that we say here is a guarantee of approval or rejection. We're simply going to give you guidance on whether we think you have a feasible project.
Thank you very much, and we understand.
Okay, well, you
Okay.
have the floor.
Thank you.
And then real quick, I just want to make sure. So I actually don't have the Zoom app on this laptop, so I'm on browser. Is it showing the
Yeah.
presentation right now?
Oh,
It
yes.
is. It
Very
is.
nicely.
Thank you. Thank you very much. This is a package that I largely prepared for the property owners, chief officer, the father provincial of the Redemptorist fathers, who are the actual owners of the property, the Carroll House and its property in the church. And so on. It isn't owned by the parish. I'm documenting a period between 20 and 24, and I did not catch every storm, but I think I did most of the major ones. Those photos are all taken by myself or Joe Berg, unless it's otherwise noted. So can we go to the next? And to orient ourselves, this is a Google Earth picture from 2018, and you'll notice that that bulkhead is pretty much straight all the way around. We do. I was asked before how we characterize the our potential for damage from flooding, and I reference here a tool that's used by the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation for people who are applying for funding. They have a coastal resilience evaluation siting tool. The highest risk on it is 10. We're 9.15. And it's a combination of threat level plus the value of the asset that is at threat. Can we go to the next, please? This is a bulkhead picture taken by Professor Johnson from the Naval Academy, whose students were doing a 2-semester project on engineering design of for this in comparison to what we were proposing. These are pictures they took, and you'll see we're just starting to see Boeing on the bulkhead on the northern side in the picture she took. Let's go to the next one. And again, I'm not going to belabor each of these charts unless there's questions. About June 22, I was doing inspection. Actually, I think John Tower may have been there, and Jackie Giles from the city. And we started to notice squiggles are beginning. And Boeing is going through several areas. Let's go to the next. Thank you. I also mentioned in last month's meeting that we had seen a floodwater incursion of dozens of feet, and it is this photo that I was referring to at the time. You can see where the debris line is. This is the western shore we're looking at, but it's not very obvious in this picture. Where the debris line is where the hill starts to climb. So the waters may have in fact gone a little bit higher than that, but they were dropping debris there. Okay, can we come to the next one, please? Okay, same year, then in April, this coastal flooding picture was taken by a parishioner and posted on Facebook for St. Mary's. You can see the incursion. It's not past that small tree to slightly to the right, but it was approaching it. Can we come to the next? Okay, now the Boeing, you can see by May that you can see it is actively getting worse. The parish, I had not known they had done this, attempted to do resodding there. Probably the grass died. I was unaware they had done it, but you can see there was a tape put up then to allow the grass time to germinate again, but we've been using the tape since then. Let's come to the next picture. Just showing more, we can see from the edge of the sod how far out that bow has moved, because the bow should be back next to the edge of the sod. Okay, and this tilting outward is caused by the snapping of the tiebacks that would come out of the uprights. And I think the last inspection we had done in September, and Joe can speak to this more, it estimated that half the tiebacks have snapped. Let's come to the next. Now we're in August. Here's another Westback flood picture. You can see where the bulkhead is there. Let's keep going. I really want to get up to the most recent pictures to discuss for discussion. Just the bow is worsening. The uprights are canting outward into the water. Here's the West Bank bulkhead. Now, when we began this project, that was perfectly straight. But between 22 and 24, we started to see slight bowing on, even on the western bank, with the erosion behind the wooden bulkhead. And it is alarming because we've seen that degree of bowing on the other shore 2 to 3 years ago. So we know it will increase. Can we come to the next, please? I don't mean to belabor this because I think it's shown better in later pictures, but just showing the difference between 20 to 24. Can we come to the next, please? All right. This work was done, I'm sorry I didn't date it, in September. And I did note to the order that there were 2 more bowed sections on the northern bank. They're closer to the bridge. And my concern there was they're starting to look like the worst bow we have now did in 2022. Okay, let's go to the next. Oh, it was just another. We had another flood in September of that year. Standing water behind the bulkhead. Let's get to the next. Okay, this was in August of 24. Professor Johnson took this picture 2 hours before high tide. So you can imagine that the water incursion had come in considerably further. Can we go next? All right, this is the damage I've been looking for, or deterioration. You can see the part of the bulkhead that is facing the land side. I estimated then that about 6 to 9 inches of bulkhead was exposed. I was seeing some metal stubs, and there's a step down into the soil directly behind it. I'm going to speak to that more when we come to the next slide. Excuse me. Let's come to the next one, which is the most recent picture. All right, we took this picture this past Sunday. The shadow you're seeing in that picture is Robert Warden, the church historian, who I believe is listening in. It's obviously worsened since September. More of the bulkhead interior face is exposed. In this picture, I noted that I estimated it to be 12 inches. However, during the week, Joe and I were out on the property again, doing other things and inspected it, and I felt it looked even worse than this picture. It may have been a matter of angle, sun angle, because we were there around noontime, and this was taken very early in the morning. But I really think at its worst point, there's about 18 inches of the landside wood exposed now. Also look at the grass behind it, and you notice the linear area that is elevated and has a sort of beige colored grass on top of it. It is the underneath that area is where the old seawall is, the stone seawall, because we were discussing last month how can we demarcate where the position of the wall, and indeed that's one of the things we're working on now, but it's even becoming obvious through natural events. So I'm sorry. So I think I have taken a long time to say it, and I thank you for your patience. there is an accelerating rate of a deterioration going on in the bulkhead now, which is of great concern to us. And I just wanted to point out and expand on the question that had been asked before. I don't know if there's any reason you would like me to go over the backup charts. I think they should be explanatory. Yeah, I'm seeing no's, so I'm not going to take up your time to do that. I just point out that students used to stand on the bulkhead in the environmental sciences classes to do water sampling, catch fish, measure the fish and then release them back and so on. They don't do that now. We've closed the bulkhead to the students. There's police tape up over a part of the area. We've closed it to the public too, and because we're worried about it continuing deterioration. I just wanted to point out, we perhaps shouldn't be surprised. 2024 was a very bad year for flooding. Just recently, NASA released measurements that said globally sea level rise was about double what it had been projected for that year. But remember, Annapolis experiences sea level rise much worse than many other areas. And you can just see in the lower graph the number of flooding days we had in 2024. So it's not necessarily to be surprised. So if there are not questions about these charts or about the background, I will stop talking and let Joe take over talking about the oyster establishment.
Before we move on,
Mhm.
let me clarify one thing. Mr. Berg is only going to speak about the oyster reefs plan for the oysters, correct?
Also, a little bit on the planting plan, but that is still extremely preliminary. If you want
Okay.
to hold that off until we're more permanent, I'd understand. Otherwise, I think Joe has the materials on the oysters.
Well, I think that if you want to talk about the planting plan,
Mm-hmm.
and it's so preliminary,
Mm-hmm.
I would encourage you to be very brief. And
Okay.
I also want to encourage you, I thank you for the photographs. They're very helpful, very valuable for us to see them. But there is no debate, I don't think, among the commissioners or the staff that something needs to be done to preserve the shoreline.
Mm-hmm.
But in all the time that we've spent together, I've not really heard you address the relevant parts of the guidelines. And that is crucial to our approval process. So if you come back again, whether it's for a formal application or for another work session, which is at your discretion, please try to review those and respond to those. We know there's a problem,
Right.
and it's how it gets solved that we
Yes.
need to evaluate.
May I ask for clarification, when you say the guidelines, are you referring to HPC or are you referring to the DOI guidelines?
HPC.
HPC.
Our authority is HPC, and John can be very helpful in guiding you through that. Okay?
Thank you.
Yes. Okay. Let's hear from Mr. Berg then. Thank you.
Well, and real quick, I'll just add on. I appreciate you still sending that presentation with the pictures and then the charts in the background, because that was something that we needed to have. It just to Will's
Yeah.
point there, Commissioner Scott, that it wasn't something that we disagreed on.
Good.
Yeah.
Thank you.
It doesn't look like I have the ability to share my screen.
Mhm.
I could share again here. Is this the Google Sheets presentation, Blue Oyster?
Sure,
Also,
that's a good place to start.
Mr. Berg, you should be able to share your screen. Everyone has access. But
I didn't hear
that
that.
means
Do you
you're
want it-
useful.
Do you want to share your screen, Joe, or would you like me to?
I can if you can let me.
Joe, are you receiving like a message saying that you're not able to?
I don't see a place on the screen where I can.
Bottom of your screen, there should be a
Bottom
little
of the
green
screen.
arrow that says share. You see that?
So I didn't get all that. I'm used to seeing someplace either at the top or the bottom of the screen where it says share your screen.
Yeah.
I don't have that.
Everyone should at the very bottom of your screen, there should be a little green arrow. You don't see that green arrow?
I do not
Zoom
see.
window?
No.
For the sake of time, I'll just share
It
it.
says share.
Thank you.
Okay, Cecil, why don't you go ahead and do that?
So
I'm gonna try to put it in
Blue
presenter view
Oyster.
here.
There it is.
Yep. Blue Oyster is a subsidiary of the Hooper Island Oyster Company. So it's the son who's moved out into this kind of a service area. Historically, they built the trays for oyster hatcheries that are used all around the bay now. Anybody that has a lease to raise oysters uses their product. You can go to the next slide. So Blue Oyster has a hatchery at Hooper's Island. They raise about 4 billion oyster larvae a year. So what we're using them for is to set these structures, which are called wave brushes. And I have a spec sheet as one of the inserts. So they get placed in a tank where they're set with oyster larvae. Once the larvae are solid and have succeeded, they're alive. They'll be transported to St. Mary's in a refrigerated truck where they'll be placed on site. So you can go to the next slide. This is the setting tank at Hooper's Island. And you see they put the substrate that would be set with oysters in the tank. And then they put the oyster larvae and water in and agitate it to keep the oyster larvae alive. The oyster larvae glue themselves to these substrates, which are then harvested and transplanted. You can go to the next slide. You can go to the next one as well. Yeah, so this is just a little bit more info. So then we're using a marine contractor that we've worked with before. And they strap these wave brushes, which you haven't seen a photo of yet, and then lower them into place. And that's really how they're installed. So all the work is from the water on a barge, and the barge is not up against the bulkhead because you can see this is a long reach excavator. Next slide. These are just a couple of photographs of this wave brush set with oysters in Virginia, where the oysters can grow, above the tide, as long as it's not above the high tide. Next slide. One more.
I'm sorry. So it looks like this is as far as it'll let me go. I'm trying to scroll down past this.
Well, that's okay. You can exit this.
I don't know if there is another one.
Oh. I think you're right. I think 5 is the end of it. If you can close this out and open the wave brush, it's a single image.
While we're waiting for that, Mr. Berg, again, I think that this is all very useful and important for us to evaluate what your final proposal will be. But my real question at this point is the installation going to not disturb the historic shoreline and shore itself? And is what you propose for the oysters going to remain invisible during all normal water conditions?
Yes. Quite an audio display here. For oysters to establish well, we don't want them to be within 2 foot of mean low water. We want them to be deeper than that. Just like us. They don't want to be freezing in the winter.
Yeah.
So it's
Okay,
important that
that's good.
tidal.
Somebody probably has two things, Joe. I don't know if you have it on your phone and on the computer or something, but there's probably 2 microphones picking you up
Yeah.
at the same time.
Right.
Cecil, I cannot tell. It's actually only Joe's it's happening on. So somehow Joe
I
has
hear it.
double audio.
I think what he says is
I
the
also
source
hear
of the echo. And Joe, that's usually caused by 2 microphones picking you up. I don't know if you have it on your phone and computer or something.
No, I just have it on my computer.
Wow.
That's, yeah.
So
No one else is having this echo. It's
the
only
top of this slide shows what these wave brushes look like. And there's some details there. Their size, their weight. And the beauty of these structures is rather than just being a simple rock on the bottom that's a hard surface that the oyster can set on, these structures have a third dimension. They're 18 inches tall with these almost hoodoos, if anybody's been out west. So you get a lot more surface area for the oyster to set on. So over time, when the oysters survive and they spawn, the revetment that these structures are placed on, which is all rock, will become encrusted with oysters. So the long-term structure of the shoreline. I've been removed, huh?
No, I hear you. I see you.
Joe.
Okay.
Joe, I just heard what the issue was. You had
Been
signed
removed
on
from the
somehow twice.
webinar by the host. So as long as you can still, I'll just ignore this. I won't.
Mr. Berg, Berg,
Yes.
yeah, there was 2 sign-ons. I just removed one of them. You're still in the meeting.
Okay.
That should get rid of your echo though.
Oh, that's great. Oh, shit. Pardon me. Oh, here I am. Okay. Pardon my language.
No problem.
The beauty of these wave brushes is you get this third dimension. So a lot more surface for the oyster to set to. And then once these spat set structures are placed on the rock revetment, that is holding the bulkhead in place so it doesn't continue to rotate out into Spa Creek. As spawning proceeds, that remaining rock will be attractive hard surface for spat to set on. So over a decade or so, we would expect to see incrustation of the total revetment below, we're saying minus 2.5 foot, which is 2 foot below lower low tide. That way it's not like they're sticking up like they do in Virginia. They'll all be underwater, but that rock revetment is now, instead of a bunch of loose rocks that are just held in place by gravity, they'll be cemented together by oysters. So it's a long-term solution. And oyster reefs, of course, support fish, support a lot of other organisms. So that's sort of the end approach here. It protects the existing bulkhead from rotating out into Spa Creek and releasing the sediment that's behind it by having this large mass of rock that's been cemented together by oysters. And then the other benefits that the oysters deliver in terms of habitat, water quality, et cetera. It might be helpful if you have patience for it and it's like 7:38. So I know 7:39 is sort of a target, but I'd be happy to do a quick run through on the planting plan, which is the PDF that's in there.
I will defer to my fellow commissioners, but as I said a few minutes ago, if you're still going through a lot of decision making as to what the plan should be, I would really save that until you have something that all parties on your side have agreed to.
Well, so just in response to that, the structural elements of this project have been permitted by the Corps of Engineers and have been approved for permitting and submittal to the Board of Public Works by the Maryland Department of the Environment. So the design is the design. But the planting plan is something that Pat and I have been going back and forth with, and we respect the membership on your organization, and we were actually going to inquire about what the preferences would be for both demarking the alignment of the historic seawall, as well as we know that the shrubs that have been planted there for a long time are dying now. And we
Phrased that way, Mr. Berg, that's exactly what we want to hear.
Yeah, and so
If you
we
could
were
briefly address that, that'd be great.
sure that'd be great. We're looking at two options that we've thought about, but we're open to others. The one option is immediately behind the bulkhead to the front of the whatever structure we have to delineate the alignment of the historic seawall. One option is to plant Spartina patens. What's happening, as Pat showed in her slides, is every time the Spa Creek water comes up onto the grass, it soaks in and it's increasing the salinity of that soil. So it's going to kill that grass. It might take a few years for that to happen, but we were going to supplement that grass with a salt adapted grass that doesn't have to be inundated on a daily basis, but just can withstand that occasional inundation. So that's Spartina patens. That's the one option. A second option is to go with a shrub planting like bayberry or others. If you all have suggestions or recommendations, we're open to that. We've done a lot of tidal wetland restoration. We have our ideas, but we don't live here. We're not focused on the historic integrity of this resource. So we're open to recommendations and incorporating those into the plans.
May I add that if you look at Joe's plan set, you'll see the two options in there and the placement of the different types of grass and shrubs relative to the
Quick
historic.
note, there was no other document with a planting plan in the shared folder for
Well, that's something that I sent
Yeah.
Sharon a little bit later, so it may not have made it. I probably sent it to her by maybe 10 o'clock this morning, and it might not have made
That's
the folder.
Yeah.
Could I?
okay. That kind of puts a little stumbling block in, but I see that Commissioner Groff would like to say something, and I am counting on his input.
Mhm.
So thank you for those images. I think no one's questioning that there's flooding. Okay, that's known, period. Okay, Joe, I said the last time, you guys are the best. No one's questioning your
Very kind.
integrity, whatever. We know you're good at what you do. Okay, but until we get a professional cultural landscape historian to sign off on the integrity of that wall and those pavilions and address the historic nature of this only straight historic approach to a colonial era house, wall built by enslaved people, this is a waste of our time. And it will not be feasible in my opinion.
When you say you're looking for a historian to sign off on the historic integrity of the seawall, I'm I'm not sure.
The historic integrity, not the structural integrity.
Okay.
That's obvious. But the cultural landscape has not been addressed in anything that's been presented to date. And I just end the conversation. This will not go forward, in my opinion, until you address that issue. You're good at what you do, but that's not what you do. And that's what this commission is about. And I'm annoyed that you're back here so quickly, quite frankly.
I would have to say also, because I may be the only one of the current commissioners who's present, who's been through your earlier presentations. And I find that the emphasis on the approval by the maritime agencies, the environmental agencies, is of course crucial to the project, but we have no authority over that. You could have 10 of those, and it still wouldn't address the issues that we are required to address in granting approval for the project. And I'm going to have to say that Commissioner Groft I agree with him. Until we get that analysis, we can't really act to approve or disapprove.
And I apologize if we've used your time poorly, or if I've kept you waiting. I was thinking back to an earlier meeting where we did get a finding of feasibility from all the commissioners, but it's been so many years we're doing this that I'd have to look through the records to see when it was. And at that time, what we had proposed was, through consultation with the Technical Protection Services in DOI, they gave us advice on what they felt needed to be done to I'm from aerospace, called mission assurance, protection of the seawall while this was being done. And that was agreed to at the time. But we're happy to take on this other activity. As I said at the beginning tonight, we were still working some of our get backs from last week. I will double check to make sure we're working with the right consultants. I want to make sure I have the right terminology down because I've heard cultural and historical, and I've heard landscape architect. I want to make sure I've got the right term down as we bring
It's
on.
all in the report that the Carroll House had commissioned that John has a copy of.
Yes.
So start there, please.
Oh, yes, we have that. And I apologize for last month. Yes, I wasn't resonating to the author's last name, but yes, we have seen that report, and we will continue to work with it.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Okay, does that conclude your presentation?
I think it does.
Okay. John, do you have anything that you'd like to add to, respond to what has been presented tonight that's not been presented previously?
Putting it in perspective, there are elements of the wall and the wall that was behind the seawall, which are missing. And I think it's also important to keep in mind that what we see now as the St. Mary's shoreline with the bulkhead is not the historic shoreline. The historic shoreline was created by the wall that is 5 feet behind the bulkhead. And the cultural landscape does need to be addressed. And that's really the sticking point here. What can be done with the wall? What could be done to represent the wall? Obviously, flooding mitigation needs to be addressed. But as the commissioners, at least two of the commissioners, have said, the historic cultural landscape needs to be a part of the application, and that's what I should work with you on.
Yes.
Prior to another presentation.
Certainly, John. Thank you.
Good. Well, for myself, I would say that at this moment, your project is not feasible until that issue of the cultural landscape is fully addressed.
Yes.
And I don't mean to speak for any of the other commissioners. If you agree with that, we can let the applicants move on, and we can move on to our other work session. Do the other commissioners have questions or comments?
I'll just add on one thing too, because I know there's a lot, and we threw a lot at you last meeting. But and this is a little bit redundant, but again, I don't think you guys have to focus any more time on talking about the reason that we're here, or maybe some of the infrastructure that isn't going to be visible. I think you guys got everything you need there. So keep that in the package. Don't toss that. And I don't think we have to talk about that anymore. And I wanted to add that in just because I think a lot of this we talked about last 2 weeks ago. I think we're all good on that. I think that part is feasible. It's the part that really our role is not. So
That's very appropriate.
I have to add something.
Guide them to move it forward.
I have to add something that is, I think, very important. This is what the fourth design that we've seen for the St. Mary's Living Shoreline, and this is by far the least intrusive solution. And I think that a lot of good work has been done, but we have something else that needs to be addressed. I don't want to take away from the excellent work that's been done. This is a good design. It's just there's another element here. We have to get back to the history.
Thank you, John.
Commissioner Greeley, want to add anything?
No, I think you guys have all said the most important thing, which is that particularly for the purposes of this commission, what we're really curious about is what the cultural landscape is going to look like, how we're going to memorialize that wall. And I think it needs to be the subject of another working session so that we can see it. But I agree, that seems to be the most important issue.
The recognition of the cultural landscape has to balance with the structural integrity of what Biohabitats has done. It's got to be an equal, to me, an equal balance. I'm not sure what that is, and I'm a landscape architect who deals in cultural landscapes. I'm not exactly sure how that should be recognized and balanced, but that's why a professional that focuses on that would be a welcome addition to this team. I also just want to make a point that the wall was finished in 1776, and wouldn't it be wonderful to celebrate that at our 250th anniversary of the birth of our nation?
Yeah, good point. Commissioner Bannon?
No, I don't have any questions.
Okay. Do you agree that this needs further work before we consider it as feasible?
Are you asking me?
Yeah.
Oh, this is my first meeting with this St. Mary's Dynamic Living Shoreline, and I find it fascinating. I love the presentation that you gave. I am a little confused about the historic cultural landscape, just because I have not been involved in any of the previous discussions. I can understand that there was the original wall that is buried, and then there's the new wall that's falling into Spa Creek or whatever. But I don't understand what Commissioner Groth is saying about the cultural landscape. So excuse my ignorance there.
Can I suggest a site visit, Mary? It's really worthwhile.
Oh, I go to St. Mary's. It's my church. I mean, I'm there often. I know exactly what you're talking about. I just don't understand the terminology of the cultural landscape.
I think it's because of how prominent that location is, and historically and visually, if you cross the bridge, that if anything's going to be done, we want to make sure that when all of the work is being done, it's done the right way. I won't comment on specifics of the cultural component either, but I think it's adding something that I'll turn it over.
I guess I don't understand the fact that the original wall, I understand how important that is, but it's buried, right? It's under the dirt. It's gone. And is anyone suggesting unearthing it? I just don't understand how that impacts what we're talking about for HPC.
Let me try to be helpful. The earlier iterations would have changed what you saw from Spa Creek Bridge, or from that side, the Eastport side, of the creek looking towards the church, towards this area. So we've overcome that very successfully. But now we're in the point where talking about environmental agency approvals and engineering and oyster preservation is not within our purview. We've solved all those questions as best as we can address them. And so now, and very much because of Commissioner Groff and Mr. Towers' expertise, I find myself wanting to see this evaluation that Mr. Groff says has been done, and Mr. Towers says he has a copy to work with the applicants. I want to see that process because that seems to me to address what we actually have the authority to approve or disapprove. So if that's helpful.
I will send the report again. There were actually 2 emails with the different reports, and I'll send those again. It's extremely informative, and not only that, there are great pictures. There are some maps, drawings. It is a very rich, or it once was a very rich environment, and most of it has been removed, and there, except for the wall itself, as is stated in the report, the possibility of finding undisturbed artifacts is low.
Really,
So-
I feel like what we're at this point, and it kind of relates to Commissioner Bannon's concerns, is we need that information and a review of the applicant's response to that information so that we can concentrate on what is really within our authority. Okay?
And Commissioner Bennett, I think Commissioner Groff made one comment about this being one of the only places, if not the only, watershed leading up to a historic home with such a prominent kind of position there. So I think that's one component. And then also there's a chance that the exposed part of the wall could be covered by any plan. So I think that was the other component too that we had talked about 2 weeks ago.
Okay, are we good?
Okay. Yes, thank you.
Yes.
Okay, thank you for working so hard. It really is. It's getting better and better in every iteration. So I think our
Thank you
time.
for the generous use of your time. We really appreciate it. And the
Thank
guy.
you. So
Take
we'll
care.
see you again soon, I hope.
Yes.
Have a good night. Thank you.
All right. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye, thank you.
Okay, our next item of business is a work session to create a solar array installation on the areas of Mellon Hall and the heating plant. And so could we have the representatives of the college who want to make that presentation to us?
The only person I have that's here that I don't have listed is someone named Colin. Is that someone with this presentation?
Yes, that would be Jason Winters.
Oh, that's Jason. Okay.
Yeah, and Jim, so Jim, are you going to be speaking? Jim Hall is the architect.
Yes, I'll be speaking myself and Allie as well for a little bit.
Okay, and for everyone's knowledge, Allie is from St. John's College.
Yes. Yeah, we've met, I believe.
Okay.
So again, before we go forward, just so that everybody's on the same page, what we're doing this evening is reviewing a sort of a final plan, and correct me if I'm wrong, Mr. Hall, for something that was part of the original review and approval for the renovations to Mellon Hall. Correct?
Actually, this is we're presenting this as a pre-application. This was originally presented back in 2021 when we were doing an initial rehabilitation, or not rehabilitation, sorry, we're doing an original project over at Mellon Hall. It was ultimately removed from the scope of the work, and we're bringing it back and expanding it now, or proposing that.
Right. So now I am sure that I'm the only commissioner that was on the serving at that time. So you can take more latitude. The reason I'm saying that is you can take more latitude because the other commissioners don't know the backstory or don't know it as thoroughly. But finally, the most important thing for me to say is, as you may have heard me say to the previous applicants, this is not a formal review for approval or disapproval, and nothing that we say tonight can be taken to be a guarantee of approval or disapproval. It's a guidance to help you move forward for your formal application.
Understood. Thank you.
Great. So please begin.
Okay, let me get my screen shared here. And if everyone can see my screen currently. Well, again, thank you very much for your time. We greatly appreciate this opportunity to speak with the HPC commissioners and HPC staff members about our proposed project. And as you indicated, that it's involving the proposed photovoltaic arrays on top of two separate buildings at St. John's College, the Mellon Hall and the adjacent heating plant. As mentioned before, my name is Jim Hall, and I'm a project architect with Kesla Group. And then just to kind of go around the room real quickly again, we have with us Ali Gontang Highfield, who is the Vice President of Finances and Operations and CFO at St. John's. John Davis is also joining us from St. John's College. He is the Director of Campus Facilities and Projects. Also joining is Jason Winters, Principal Architect at Kesla Group, and Dante Balasone, another project architect at Kesla Group. I just wanted to say that we're excited to be presented to you here today, again, as a pre-application, and looking forward to discussing your thoughts on our proposed project's feasibility, and looking forward to any recommendations for additional information that we may need to touch up on for our submission for public hearing. Right now, our targeted plan is to be moving forward for a presentation during the June 10th public hearing. That is a bit of a moving target for us. We have a couple other items that are trying to get lined up, as we'll talk about a little bit further along in this presentation. For the sake of time, I just wanted, would it be better? There are a number of places where we could pause and kind of talk about the presentation intermittently, or would it be best to get through the whole thing and reserve time at the end?
It's probably better to reserve time at the end with the understanding that if commissioners are having trouble understanding something, they may want to ask a question immediately for clarification.
Absolutely. Please interrupt at any time, and I'm happy to go through that.
Okay.
All right. So then at this time, I'd like to hand the presentation briefly over to Ali to kind of introduce the project a bit and St. John's impetus for the project.
Oh, I'll be very brief, and then I'll turn it over to the capable hands of Jim Hall. As you mentioned, we actually did present this as part of our Mellon Hall renovation years ago, back in 2021. We did remove it at the time. The cost was really sort of out of our reach at the time, but we recently had the opportunity to apply for a grant from the Maryland Energy Administration. So we did submit for that grant, and we're actually awarded that grant. And all of this is obviously contingent on the approval from the city and the HBC, as well as MHT, since it's a state grant. But we really appreciate your time and effort. The city's been wonderful partners to the college, and we're very excited at the possibility of reducing our carbon footprint and adding some sustainability features so that it'll help us with our very large utility bill. It will help us with recruiting students. All of these things are wonderful things for the college. So we're very happy you're helping us with this pre-application, and I'll just go ahead and turn it right back to Jim Hall.
Thank you, Ali. Appreciate it. And thanks for the sum up there. And as Ali mentioned, the MAE grant that was awarded was specifically to fund the two arrays that we're talking about here. But that doesn't mean that other clean energy initiatives aren't being considered around campuses. Again, as Ali kind of alluded to there, the grant actually comes in three parts, with the arrays being, the design of the array being one component, a student internship program being another component to allow St. John's students to learn about solar design and clean energy. But we're also developing what's called a campus clean energy master plan. And the idea behind that is to identify other potential clean energy initiatives that may be appropriate for St. John's. And that could include, for instance, a solar array installed, somewhere else on campus, or geothermal well, or any other kind of clean energy initiative. We're in the very beginning stages of that process. But along with that, we'd be developing clean energy, what we'd be calling clean energy standards. So essentially, as future work is proposed at St. John's, albeit a renovation or a new construction of some kind, they can refer back to this master plan and look at how those opportunities for clean energy can be implemented. And all this would act as a roadmap, like I said, for not only future development, but also kind of financing through other grant initiatives. That being said, obviously anything that's being proposed here would want to go through the historic preservation review process as well. So our two subject buildings, again, are Mellon Hall and the heating plant, you see in the upper left-hand corner of the screen there, highlighted in orange. Now, both subject buildings are within the Annapolis Historic District. They also fall into a couple of other historic zones and statuses worth mentioning. One is they're both within the National Registers District. They're both within the National Landmark District. And then at the state level, both buildings do fall into the Maryland Inventory of Historic Properties. But the differences kind of stop there, where Mellon Hall, as Ali mentioned, through previous funding from the state, has an MHT, Maryland Historical Trust easement associated with it, whereas the heating plant does not. And so this means that while both buildings are subject to review by the HPC, Mellon Hall must also go through the MHT process. And so we are currently in that. We've been back and forth with them for a little while now, and have submitted some information for their review as well. And so that's one of the moving targets I was mentioning earlier about targeting that particular public hearing.
Okay, is there a sticking point or something that they feel specifically they need more information on?
No, nothing right now. We submitted, I believe it was last week, the very similar information that you're seeing right now. And we're trying to get on their schedule to have initial conversations, much like this conversation today.
Okay, so it's really just a scheduling, timing sort of issue.
Exactly. We understand that we need to have approval from MHT before approval can be provided here with this body.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm. On these next few sheets, we wanted to outline some of the guidelines and standards that appear to be governing this proposed project, basically a rooftop array on both buildings. Obviously, we'll be focusing more on the ones centered for Annapolis, but understand that being in the historic building, the historic district, both buildings are subject to the Annapolis Historic Design Manual and Guidelines, which then references the Secretary of Interior standards for rehabilitation and certainly has an associated guideline with that. On the Maryland Historical Trust side, their easement process focuses more on the Secretary of Interior standards for the treatment of historic properties. A lot of these, as I'm sure everybody here is aware, a lot of these documents have very similar language and very similar requirements regarding rehabilitation and other preservation efforts. So some of these guidelines that we've listed here are duplicative or kind of repeat themselves, but I wanted to go over some of the pertinent items. Looking forward to having more of a conversation on. The first of which is what we call this project. It appears, looking through the Annapolis design guidelines and manual, that this would be called an alteration that would be sensitive to historic buildings and streetscapes. On the Secretary of Interior sides, this seems to want to fall into the category of a rehabilitation, and just kind of wanted to get confirmation of that. But just for clarity, the rehabilitation being defined as the act or process of making possible a compatible use for a property through repair, alteration, or addition while preserving those portions or features which convey its historic, cultural, or architectural value. So it didn't seem that this project would fall under any of the other kind of preservation initiatives under the standards being either preservation, restoration, or reconstruction. So we felt that it most clearly or best seemed to fit under that avenue.
That's very, I appreciate you taking that approach. That is very helpful to the staff and the commission to show that you've familiarized yourself and that you're specifically trying to address the relevant portions of those guidelines.
Thank you very much. And if you like, we can go into some of these specific points, brought forward a couple of the standards that are specifically called out in the guidelines that we think are most relevant to this project. First of which would be sections D3 and D4. D3 being referring to the preservation of significant original features, and then D4 being about the preservation of historic alterations. I don't know if everybody's familiar, but the basics of this being that the design needs to respect distinguishing original and historic features of the historic building and their sites, and making sure that they're preserved, and that these features include distinctive stylistic features, examples of skilled craftsmanship, features such as roofing, windows, doors, original siding, etc. So we wanted to propose that the photovoltaic arrays that we are putting forward here would be installed on flat roof areas of each building, as far away from the parapet walls as we can get them, and that the building facades, windows, doors, et cetera, would not be altered as a portion of as a part of this project, and also propose that the solar panels and the mounting racks that there would be on. We've got a couple of options there that we can go over, but in both options, the vertical profiles are relatively low and be kept as close to the roof plane as possible as well, to minimize their visibility from grade and preserve the kind of historic horizontal planes that are associated with these two more modern looking buildings. And that's more referring to Mellon Hall. But in both building instances, there's these large flat planes at the roof that are distinguished by just the termination of that vertical wall face.
Quick question.
I have a quick comment. Oh, I'm sorry.
Oh, please go ahead, Commissioner Cummings, please.
I just want to say, so it said arrays contain and I guess the language is funny here, but contain flat roof areas, and then you just mentioned proposed 4 flat roof. I don't know how much it really matters, but I'd love to see that language say they would only be on flat roof areas, because I think there's a significant difference in at least the way that I receive this presentation for the slanted slate roofs versus the flat roof. That's my only comment there. I think there's a difference in the way it's.
I very much appreciate that. Yeah.
2 points of clarification from me, Mr. Hall.
Sure.
Is this essentially the same proposal that you made, that the college made when asking for approval of the renovations to Mellon Hall?
It follows some very similar areas, and we're looking at the array has expanded a bit.
Okay, yeah, that's mainly selfish just for me and maybe Mr. Tower. And the other question that I hope will be helpful to everyone is it in any substantial way similar to the array that's on top of the new Hillman garage? So that people could see sort of what kind of thing it is you're talking about.
I've seen that array. It's going to be different in the fact that if I remember correct, from on top of that garage, it's above the parking, correct? It's
yes.
Elevated above.
Yeah,
our array is down at the roof completely. The idea is that we're trying to bring it as close to that roof plane as we can. So you'll see in upcoming slides that our array, are the rack systems that we have are anywhere between 9.25 inches tall to about 11.5 inches tall, depending on which option.
I just wanted to give everybody a point of reference if they're not, because they're not familiar, most of us here, with the original proposal. So that's helpful, I think, I hope. Okay.
No, thank you very much.
Continue.
Absolutely. in terms of keeping new elements on the roof low and as visibly obscured as we can, another element that would be associated with these rooftop arrays would be conduit. All the array panels we need to interconnect, and then we need to feed that electricity into the building somehow. And while we are reviewing, we're working with our electrical team to identify the routing of that conduit. The intent right now is, again, to keep that conduit, which should be about a 2-inch metal conduit, down as low as possible, again, to that roofscape, and not any more visible than the roof panels themselves. So in attempting to address D3, the same approach that we would be using on original roof areas, original flat roof only areas, for Mellon Hall, any of the associated additions on Mellon Hall would also receive the same treatment. So in that way, we're trying to respect both the original portions of the building as well as any additions that have achieved some sort of historic significance on that building. As you'll see later, the heating plant has not had any significant alterations since its construction to speak of. So that section doesn't totally apply there, but wanted to bring it forward for Mellon Hall. Also felt that sections D9 and D10, which are specific to roof areas, vis-a-vis the protection of the overall character of the roof, and then the protection of historic materials, also applied to this design. And what we wanted to bring up was that, again, that while we are proposing these arrays only on flat roof areas, each one of these areas contains, like I said, a parapet wall of some varying height, which creates long, low horizon lines, kind of defining the building, especially at Mellon Hall. And as stated in section D3 above in the commentary there, that the proposed arrays will be kept as low as possible to keep their visibility obscured from the immediate surrounding, and grade as much as possible, and maintain those historic planes and parapet walls themselves. That being said, it is worth noting that some of these panels, as you get up in higher elevations, for instance, up in the upper campus or in some of those surrounding buildings around Mellon Hall and the heating plant, may become visible. I did want to note that in the spring and summer months, many of these, and we do have some slides that show these view sheds, many of these vantage points would be obscured through the existing tree cover, but that also wanted to propose the idea that these existing roofs of the buildings serve a very utilitarian function for the building. And even as you're walking around the base of Mellon Hall, and again, we've got some photographs to show this, as you look up, you can see close to the building the outlines of the tops of mechanical equipment such as air handlers or vent stacks that have been placed there for plumbing or for mechanical purposes, such as vent hoods in the lab spaces, for instance. And that these panels would not be taller than a majority of those already existing rooftop components, and in keeping with the character of that roof. Moving on to section D10, the character defining kind of historic materials of the building for us, especially looking at Mellon Hall, for instance, would be basically in those vertical walls. So you've got a significant amount of masonry, of poured concrete surfaces, and all that terminates at the very top with a parapet cap. And none of that would be impacted as a result of the installation of these arrays. You may be wondering why we've also included section D12, which deals with skylights. This was actually brought up, Mr. Scott, I'm sure you remember in some of our previous conversations for the original array, that there wasn't a lot in the manual that specifically refers to solar arrays, and that skylights may be, this section about skylights may point us in some direction for guidance. And it basically talks about any kind of proposed skylight being kept, again, low profile, low to the roof. And again, as we've been mentioning previously in other sections, that's exactly what we're attempting to do.
Good.
Moving on briefly to the Secretary of Interior standards. Again, a lot of these overlap what the manual appears to be indicating, but I did want to pull forward a couple of sections. One being B9, which explains that exterior alterations or related new construction shall not destroy historic materials that characterize the property, and that the new work shall be differentiated from the old and shall not be shall be compatible with the massing, size, scale, and architectural features to protect the historic integrity of the property and its environment. So once again, the proposed photovoltaic arrays will be installed to avoid any character-defining materials. That be, like I mentioned earlier, exterior wall parapets, wall materials, doors, windows, etc. And any of the, you'll see later, we're not proposing the arrays to be located over any of the, for instance, at Mellon Hall, there's the that roof that goes over the auditorium that's very prominent, and we're not proposing any photovoltaic arrays over top of that. And then again, that these arrays being, on top of, as I mentioned before, utilitarian areas of the roof, and trying to keep with the character of that roof, and that being kept as low as possible, visibly minimal as possible, so that we are not impacting the massing, size, scale, or features of the existing building. Section B10 notes that new additions or adjacent construction should be undertaken in such a manner that, if removed in the future, the essential form and integrity of the historic property and its environment would be unimpaired. And in both mounting options that we have, that we'll be presenting a little later on, it is entirely possible, either with a ballasted system or a direct attachment system, that these arrays can be placed down and in the future removed, and that the basic integrity of the building would not be impacted as a result. Lastly, I wanted to bring up, this is in the guidelines and related specifically to roofs. It says that the installation of new mechanical and service equipment should be done so in a way that they are inconspicuous from the public right-of-way and do not damage or obscure character-defining features. And so again, as I've been mentioning before, our low-profile solar arrays that is intended to not obscure any of the kind of historically significant components of the building, and to be as minimally visible as possible from around the building or from anywhere around, except where I mentioned earlier, where we may see some of the arrays as we get up higher in elevation. This next section is more related to the what the Maryland Historic Trust is interested in through the Secretary of Interior standards for the treatment of historic properties. And again, a lot of this is duplicated in our responses to other sections. So I'm just going to skip over that for now. Okay. So here we wanted to give you a kind of a brief history of each building and show you exactly where we're proposing the two array systems. Starting at the top, Mellon Hall was built in 1958 and 1959, and as a lot of folks know, it was designed by the West Coast modernist architect Richard Neutra, and remains one of his few remaining, I believe, actually maybe one of his last buildings on the East Coast. In 1988 and 1989, and actually the original building, I apologize, you can see here, or you can see, with my cursor over here, you can see identified here in this kind of brown color there. The addition in green, which ultimately infilled the courtyard, was constructed in 1988 and 1989, and encompasses the Elizabeth Myers Mitchell Art Museum, as well as the administrative components of the building. And then in 2001, the components that you see in blue there, which were designed by Zigger Sneed, were constructed, and they included a conference addition kind of on that northwest side of the building along St. John Street, and an infill of a canopy space in the courtyard that is affectionately called the Fishbowl Cafe now. And then obviously in 2001, we went through our rehabilitation efforts at St. John's to its current state now, and those designs being by David M. Schwartz Architects and Keslow Group as well.
Oh, wow. Interesting. Thank you.
Of course. To contrast that, the heating plant was built 1951, and we've looked for record documents. We've gone through the Maryland Historic Inventory, and it's difficult to find any information on this building other than it was built in 1951. And I don't have currently an original designer for that building.
Wow.
But as you can see, there's been no major renovations or alterations to this building since its original construction. Getting back to Mellon Hall, the areas in blue in the upper left portion of your screen there, what you're seeing are the areas where we're proposing to place the solar array. This encompasses both, again, original roof areas of the building, as well as certainly the additions that we just went through. Primarily, what we're looking at here is installing arrays on top of what is now the Francis Scott Key lobby space, as well as what is called the conversation room. Moving a little bit further back behind the auditorium, again, no arrays are being, no photovoltaic panels are being considered for the over top of the auditorium. Moving behind the auditorium for what is their performing arts spaces is another zone for photovoltaic arrays being proposed currently. And then along the two academic wings, both the second floor academic wings and the single story academic wing would also potentially contain arrays. On the 1988-1989 edition, we're looking at the possibility of installing arrays on top of the Mitchell Museum. And then lastly, looking at placing it over top of the administrative offices. And then, of course, be looking at installing some over top of the 2001 edition by Zigger Sneed. For the heating plant, the two flat roof areas are the only two flat roof areas on the building are the zones that we're considering for these arrays. And as mentioned before, none of the gabled roof or any of the higher roof areas are being considered. So here we wanted to go over a couple of the different array options that we're considering, and we certainly have one that we are favoring and that we'd like to proceed with, but we have also another option that we can look over. The two options here are broken down into either a ballasted system that you see on the left or a direct attached system that you see on the right. The ballasted system on the left utilizes a series of interlocking pads that are then weighed down with blocks spread across the roof. In this way, there is actually no physical connection from these mounting points through the roofing membrane, and all this just sits directly on top of that roof system. What's nice about this, there's several advantages to this. One being that we minimize the amount of penetrations through the roof membrane, which obviously invites less opportunity for any future leaks. Additionally, as you can see here, the ballasted system actually places the panels on a slight angle, about 5 degrees. And that's important because it creates a more optimal angle with the sun, allowing them to be more efficient. However, it also provides an opportunity to shed water. And we'll talk about why that's important when we get to the flat panel system. But then racked at a slight angle, it allows for a much easier access point to get into the depth of these arrays as you're kind of traveling along. So you can see there's these access ways from panel to panel that someone can reach into and maintain this system as needed. Overall, the total height of these panel systems would be 9¼ inches tall off the roof.
Wow. How high is the parapet?
So we'll go into that too. The parapets range in height at Mellon Hall anywhere from 6 inches to 4 feet.
And there is no parapet right now.
Not as you would define in what we're calling a parapet. You talk like basically a rise in the height of the wall above the roof membrane. So there are parapets on several portions of the wall, and like I said, I have a slide in a little bit later that goes over exactly the height difference in relationship of those parapets in relationship to these panels.
This isn't our jurisdiction, but are these panels perfectly level?
Are they level? Well, the panels on the left here being the ballasted system are at an angle of about 5 degrees.
Okay.
The panels on the right, which would be a direct attached system, do have the ability to lay flat or have a kind of a flat orientation. And while it may have, like I said, it may present itself as more of an unbroken plane here, there are several disadvantages to this system. The first of which is the height. Because of the additional flashing that's required at each one of these attachment points, the panels actually have to sit up higher than the ballasted system. And so instead of being at 9 1/4 inches, these panels end up being about 11 1/2 inches tall. In addition to that, as you can see, this monolithic layout makes it very difficult, especially into the depth of the, oh, I apologize, into the monolithic layout there. It's harder to get into the depth of those arrays should something fail and address it. And what may fail is the fact that at every one of these standoffs that you see here, those are actually end up being penetration points where fasteners are drilled down into the roof deck to more securely fasten it. And so you're talking about hundreds of possible penetrations through that roof system. Now, granted, in theory, all of them should be flashed and they should be sealed. But as everybody knows, it just takes one leak and it becomes very difficult to find if you have this monolithic layer of panels on top of it. And there's certain, we're working through this now, but there's certain roof decks where it's less advantageous to utilize this system than a ballasted system, given the existing construction. So the design team's preference is more on the angled panel approach.
Well, and it's less like there's more likely for success in my experience. When they lay flat and the water just sits there, they eventually go into the panel itself.
No, thank you for bringing that up too. That's absolutely an excellent point, is that as the water pools on top of these panels, not only do they destroy it, as you've mentioned, but they also collect dust, debris, et cetera. And then that settles and then just, sticks to the panel and causes it to be less efficient over time.
Why are you even presenting that alternative to us? Doesn't sound like it has anything going for it.
Well, I appreciate that. We weren't quite sure which way the commission would be interested in us. They both offer slightly different aesthetic advantages as you see them from the higher elements, higher elevations. So we did want to put it out there as that is a possibility, but it is certainly not our preference.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm. Moving on to the other equipment that's associated with these arrays, from the rooftop panels, the direct current that's produced by those panels are then fed through a series of metallic conduit. Those then need to penetrate then eventually into the roof or through the building envelope, and then down into the electrical room. At that point, they're fed to a series of inverters. Those inverters convert the energy from DC power to AC power, and then that's fed into the building or fed back out to the incoming service line through a combiner box, and then ultimately to what's called a non-fuse panel. So the elements that are outside the building consist of the arrays themselves, some conduit and penetrations at the roof, and then this non-fuse panel. That non-fuse panel is, we give some of the sizes here. It's about 10 inches by 28 inches by 50 inches. And it's designed as a basic emergency shutoff. And by code, it's required to be mounted on the outside of the building at grade and accessible at all times. So this is the proposed array at Mellon Hall currently. As you can see, we've got, as I mentioned before, we're placing panels on some of the original building roofs areas, as well as several of the additions. In total, this system consists of 20 separate arrays, and about 452 panels. If utilizing the ballasted system at that 5-degree angle, it is capable of producing roughly 300,000 kilowatt hours annually.
Does each separate array require those conduits and panels for each one, or do they all flow to a central location?
They would all flow to a central location. So the conduits would need to be designed to interconnect these panels, and we're looking at ways to route them over the roof and drop them down into the roof as quickly as we can, and then through the interior of the building, get them to a mechanical an electrical shaft to drop it down to the basement level where we're proposing this equipment goes.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. We've took a we're working on some elevations around the building as well. We wanted to identify and show about where all of these, as looking at it from elevation, these arrays would be located. Not that they would be visible from those points, but where they would be located. The first elevation at the top of the screen is your entire elevation running down St. John Street. And the arrays are currently being proposed to the far left, there being the 2001 addition to the building here, and then over the Performing Arts building where our recent 2021 project occurred. As we turn the building and get into the adjacent parking lot, you're looking at, again, arrays on top of that Performing Arts component of the building, and then moving down over top of the Francis Scott Key lobby space. And again, there would be no arrays proposed over top of the kind of the metal panel roof that's here over top of the auditorium space. And then lastly, there's a desire to place some array panels on top of the Mitchell Museum as well. As you turn the building to look at it from the campus side, you have a lot more roof area, obviously, where there's associated panels there. That top elevation, again, top elevation being kind of running down campus. And from left to right, you're seeing it again at or maybe bottom, you're seeing it from the second floor is basically arrays being proposed all the way across that elevation. And then arrays being proposed over top of the lobby space, the conversation room behind the art gallery, and then the art gallery or museum itself, the academic, or sorry, I keep saying academic, but the administrative wing of the building, and then the first floor academic wing of the building. And then turning the corner again to that parking lot that's between Mellon Hall and the heating plant, you're looking at it running from running down the length of that single-story academic wing, and then again, kind of that edge of the 2001 edition by Zigger Sneed. This is where the study exists, talking about the relationship of the panels to the various different parapet heights. And as you can see, as I mentioned before, the parapet heights, they range in height from about 6 inches in places to around 4 feet. I will zoom back out on this slide, but I kind of wanted to zoom in here just to make a point. So this is, again, our array in each one of the locations that we've studied, and wanted to point out that the array would only be higher than the parapet walls at locations E, G, H, I, and J. That being said, I'll try to center that again. In each one of those locations, due to the relative height of the array, you almost have to be level with that top of the parapet wall in order for those to become visible. In all other instances, you either need to be, the arrays are not visible unless you are much higher than those parapet walls.
Do you think you could keep them under 2 inches in height?
I can try.
I'm just kidding. I thought maybe that would make somebody laugh, but I guess you're.
No, it would certainly be nice, and we've looked at various different racking systems, and it's just that this is the lowest that we could find at the moment.
I thought they were making photovoltaic films.
Oh, absolutely. We could. That's. I know that they're making those. I don't think they're quite as efficient as panels yet, but they are out there.
My comment was a facetious one, just to be clear. I was not serious.
Understood. Appreciate it. The next sheet is a duplication of the study, but with the flat panels. And I'll go back and forth a couple of times so you can kind of see the difference here. But the flat panels end up protruding a little bit higher, again, being at that 11.5 inch height versus the 9.25 inch height that the ballasted system utilizes. Oops, there we go. Moving on to, again, the additional equipment that's required for the design. I'm sorry, Mr. Scott, do you have a question?
Yeah, I'm just going to say that I think that when you get to the point of making any future work session presentations or your final application presentation, some applicants have taken just balloons on a string and positioned them so that you can get a better sense. Rather, these drawings are very good, very helpful, what you've presented, but sometimes that makes it a little easier to understand exactly what's going to be visible from the ground level. Float the balloon, get a position, take a photograph. We see reference points that we're familiar with that we're physically better able to connect to.
Okay, are you recommending that the balloons would be at the height of the array panels? So
Yeah,
that
I guess it's tedious, but you get it so the top of the balloon is exactly at the amount of part of the array that's going to be above the parapet.
Jim, it doesn't have to be balloons. You could have
you can do anything.
Orange traffic cones. I mean, seriously, so you can see them.
Yeah,
understood.
Makes a big difference.
Right.
Okay, well, thank you. We'll look into that. We'll see if we can find some visual.
You got to find one that's under 6 inches or 9 inches rather.
That's right.
You call Commissioner Cummings.
Maybe a red
I'm sure he
solo
has some
cup.
suggestions. All right. Sorry to interrupt.
No worries. No, thank you very much for the observation. Wanted to point out here on this sheet, just the additional equipment for the arrays that are currently being proposed at Mellon. Interior to the building, you would end up having about 5 inverters, and a combiner box. And then again, that non-fused panel needing to be located at the building exterior. Currently, we're proposing that be located in the existing electrical yard that exists behind Mellon Hall. You can see here in this photo, this is kind of the St. John Street. Oh, sorry, I'm zooming in the wrong side. The St. John Street at the edge of that photo. What you're seeing here is kind of the edge of a screened wall that masks existing equipment, which, John, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe it's some switch gears back there and BGE's access points to the building and the rest of the campus.
You are correct, Jim.
Thank you. And then you're seeing there at the end of this masonry wall is represented here at the terminus. That's the terminus of that wall here. The ideal spot for that location would be here against this poured concrete wall against some existing BGE equipment as well. And that's approximately the size comparative to the existing equipment.
It's a good location.
Yeah.
Thank you. Okay, that concludes kind of the design for Mellon Hall, and now switching over to the heating plant. Heating plant, a much simpler array. Obviously, we're expanding as much space as we're ideally would be placing it on as much space as possible on those 2 flat roof sections. The 2 arrays involved in this would total about 104 panels and have the capability of producing roughly 70,000 kilowatt hours annually. And again, these are kind of in progress elevations, but the idea here being that, again, it's only being proposed on these flat areas of the building as you move yourself around the building from elevation point to elevation point, and that the gabled roof remains untouched.
I think doing what we were just mentioning about giving us some kind of photographic evidence of the amount that would show above the parapet would almost solve or answer, I should say, the questions about this structure.
I agree.
And what's nice about this structure here is that we have about 3 feet of parapet wall height to play with. And so no matter where we go with this, either the angled panels or the flat panels, both of them are only visible if you're up in higher elevations on adjacent buildings.
And what vantage points would those be, really? I mean, it's pretty
there's a sliver of a view from both Gillum and Spectre, and then across the street on the Calvert Street parking garage, as you get into that stairwell that's kind of to the back facing St. John Street. Those are the only locations that we could find that you'd get that view down, or standing on top of the roof of Mellon Hall if you ever were up there. But
that's not the public way.
It's not the public way. No, not supposed to.
Yeah,
say,
not
be
supposed
careful
to be.
saying those are the only ones you could find, because there's going to be some neighbor that finds a spot where they can see something.
That's true. We hope we found everything, but certainly are open to the idea that there could be other positions as well.
That's one reason we have public hearings, so that neighbor can share that information.
Absolutely. And again, getting back to the additional equipment that would be required at the heating plant, we're looking here at a total of 2 inverters, again, a combiner box, both those being interior to the building, and then that non-fused emergency shutoff switch be proposed along this elevation here, which is the St. John Street elevation. This is, I'll zoom in here a little bit, already contains some electrical connections, some other miscellaneous equipment off the back side of that building. We felt, or I guess this side of the building, we felt that somewhere here in this blue zone would be an appropriate place for that panel box.
So, Jim, are those historic pallets that are stacked up there?
Very historic, John. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Get your hands on them now, John.
So our next section of the presentation covers what we felt we were trying to identify kind of important view sheds around the buildings. And we identified the following here, starting with A here being at the upper campus terrace, kind of looking northwest. You're between McDowell Hall. I'm sorry, you're between McDowell Hall. What was Randall Hall is now Fielding Moore Hall, and then Campbell Hall here, which is now Edensward. This becomes one of our historic views and important view sheds. And then standing at the base, I'll zoom in here because it's probably hard to see at that vantage point. At the base of the campus stairs, there is the kind of looking at the Mellon Hall at that oblique angle, being another view shed we felt we'd like to cover. Then moving to area C, which is across the street at Eaglehart, looking back at the building. Area D, kind of looking back from College Creek back up at the campus. E being looking at kind of at the corner, along the main sidewalk coming up to the building, at the corner of the building, again on the oblique. And then F, there is a walkway that is not quite centered, but is coming off that main walkway and looking right at the heating plant. And then G being located on St. John Street, looking down. H being at Calvert Street, looking back at at Mellon Hall, and then I obviously looking back down the other direction. And then we also flagged J here being kind of at the terrace of the Greenfield Library, located between Packet Carroll and Edensward, looking back at the building there. So we've got some slides here to cover that. What you're seeing here at the top is area A. Again, looking kind of down the lawn of St. John's from the upper terrace area. I can certainly zoom in here to Mellon Hall, and wanted to bring up again the fact that you're already seeing at this elevation, and certainly we'll see as further down, the profiles of existing mechanical and other types of equipment they're on top of that roof system there. Again, proposing an array on top of this roof, and proposing an array on top of this roof. Zooming back out, you can see some of the existing tree coverage that was bare in this photograph. We were lucky enough to get that shot so we could kind of see through that. But certainly in the spring and summer, these become much more densified with leaves and harder to see through and filtered. Area B, again, being at that oblique, looking kind of at that corner of Mellon Hall. As you drop down, You're still seeing some of that mechanical equipment at the top of the roof, but any of our proposed arrays would be lower than these. So kind of getting back to your points, Mr. Scott, about the balloon element there. So there would certainly be lower than those points there. And then also again over here at the library, or sorry, the art museum. On this slide here, we're showing C, which is located at Eaglehart, looking across the way over at Mellon. So you're kind of seeing the extent of Mellon from the Francis Scott Key Auditorium on the left, all the way over to the planetarium on the right. And again, you're not really seeing you're not seeing over top of that parapet. You're still seeing up underneath that parapet. So our belief here is that at this angle, you would also not have any view of that array, which again, we could solve with the balloon trick that you were talking about. And then standing back here at area D, looking back from College Creek back up at the campus, again, you'd have some array over top of the academic wing here. And again, this is the art gallery that's kind of protruding a little bit. You're seeing a little bit beyond the planetarium there. This is from vantage point E, standing again at that oblique. So you're seeing kind of the range of Mellon Hall here down the length of the academic wing. You're seeing the kind of the top of the second story component and the 2001 edition. All, even with the leaves down, it's still pretty obscured through that tree coverage. And certainly when the leaves come back in the spring and fall, it's much harder to see. And I believe here you're also seeing kind of the outline of the heating plant through the trees there as well. This is that walkway that I mentioned earlier that's a little off center from the heating plant, from the main walkway along St. John's campus. And again, you're seeing the heating plant through the trees there. And this is, again, looking at St. John Street. So this is the backside of Mellon Hall where those historic pallets are. And then you're seeing the 2001 edition here at Mellon Hall. This line of trees I wanted to bring up are evergreens, and they do heavily mask that facade as you're looking down that street. This is a view looking down Calvert Street. And again, you're kind of looking at that wall of their face of Mellon Hall, kind of at the edge of this end of the street. And again, the tree canopy is quite heavy, but you do end up seeing kind of the roof that we would end up placing the array on, although you wouldn't at this vantage point be able to see any of those panels. And then finally, kind of looking back up the street, where we've at the performing arts side of the building, and again, noting that long line of evergreen trees. And then lastly, this is vantage point J. So I guess this is standing on top of that terrace, the Greenfield Terrace, looking out. You're seeing Packet Carroll House on the left. You're seeing, I believe this is Humphreys Hall here on the right. But then through the trees, just barely visible, you're starting to see the outline of Mellon Hall there, the auditorium roof where we would not be placing any array panels. But again, this is, even with the leaves down, heavily masked by tree coverage. The next couple of slides go over what we were looking at, trying to get up higher in elevation and look down on these roofs. And we've identified, a couple of these locations as having those vantage points. Obviously, looking from the upper floors of McDowell, some of the roof of Mellon Hall, though heavily obscured, is visible. Again, let's see, I guess over here at Randall Hall, which, like I said earlier, is now Fielding Rumore, looking at the either the dining terrace or the upper floors, which are kind of student areas, not necessarily public areas. Those views they do have views of the roof. There is some coverage by the trees, but they do have some vantage points on that roof. In Edensward Hall, the only place to view the top of the roof would be from within a student dorm room, and those are heavily canopied with tree coverage, especially during the spring and the summer months. We took some photos just to get a view from, what it would look like, how much of the lower roof you can see from the upper elevations of Mellon Hall itself, and you could certainly be able to see the arrays at that point. And then, like I said, to this corner of the parking garage, due to some windows that are there, has some vantage of the heating plant, maybe a little bit of Mellon Hall, but most of that is obscured through the high, wall that's along this edge of the parking lot. And then, as I mentioned there's kind of slivers of views over here at Gillum and Spector Halls. This first slide is dealing with what was Randall Hall, now Fielding and Rumore. That main image is we're seeing kind of at the top of the steps from the dining terrace. So again, more of the roof becomes visible at this point, and we can certainly zoom in. But again, so are the other mechanical devices that are located on top of that roof, and plumbing, vent stacks, et cetera, they're all there. From within the lounge, these are older photos, so you're not going to see, for instance, the new terrace that's there now. But we want to get some photos in there from the spring and summer months, and so you can see this is kind of up in one of those student lounges. So there's some masking that occurs there. This is another view of the terrace, a little bit further, actually closer to Campbell or Edensward Hall. So again, you're a little bit higher up. And you can see some more of that roof space. But then this swings back again across to Fielding Rumore or Randall Hall. This is squarely on the dining terrace, looking out over at the building. And again, in the spring and summer, you've got quite a bit of tree coverage for most of that building. In these views, we are at the upper floors of McDowell Hall. That main one, let's see. The main image that you're seeing there is from one of the classroom spaces. We've actually had to outline this a little bit. Again, this is taken in the summer, but a lot of that roof is masked. But you would be able to see, likely some of the top edges here of the academic wings, and maybe some of the administrative portion of the building as well. These are some other examples from McDowell taken at different vantage points, including at the Belfry. So even at the Belfry, it's a little hard to see where we're at here, but these are the lower roofs here at Mellon. The next slide, the main image here is looking kind of out through one of the student areas at Edensward, up the upper floors. And again, it's entirely masked by tree coverage in the spring and the summer months. We were able to take some shots down, and this is, again, one of the higher terraced areas between this building and Randall Hall. But we took it where the leaves were down, so that you could begin to see where, how far up on the in relationship to the roofs that you were at. Lower down, kind of between Mellon Hall, and I know this is not higher elevation, but just kind of get something that would be visible from Edensward or Campbell Hall there. But this is kind of between Campbell / Edensward and Mellon Hall there. And moving further down a little bit there. So again, the array would only be positioned on this roof here, and would not be covering any of this roof area here over top of the auditorium. This is taken from some of the classroom spaces within Mellon Hall. So you're looking at a second floor classroom looking out over top of the first floor classroom. So they would certainly have a very good view of the arrays as they'd be positioned there. And then some of the academic wing as well. And sort of that occurs throughout the upper floors of Mellon. This is from on top of the parking deck across the street. And again, from that stair tower, we were able to take a shot that looks down on top of the roof at the heating plant. If I zoom in on these images here, though, that back wall is the wall that, so you're seeing the very top of Mellon Hall there, just above. If I stand far enough away from that wall, you begin to see the top of the building. And if I look back over at the heating plant, the only thing that you're seeing is the top of the gabled roof at that vantage point. So really, you need to be kind of at the wall, holding the camera up above your head and trying to get a shot there. And then these views are taken from Spector Hall and from Gillum Hall, kind of at the end, common room spaces in those buildings. And again, you kind of have to kind of crane your neck around, and you can kind of sort of see the top of the heating plant. But even at those views, again, it'd be very hard to see the actual roof surface, and thus any part of the array. And then lastly, we wanted to close with kind of an overview of both the arrays side by side and kind of in the greater context of its immediate surroundings. What I did want to mention was that across the street in these government buildings, there is an existing array that's there, obviously much smaller, but it certainly would be in the same neighborhood as that array. With that, I'll pause here. I think it's a good slide to end on anyways, and we can certainly open up the floor to further conversation. Dante also has another package of information if anybody's interested on like the size of any of the individual array sections or how many panels are proposed in any of the sections. We can get into that as well.
Thank you for the thoroughness of your presentation and the way that you address the relevant aspects of the different sets of guidelines. I guess because I was familiar with the first presentation a few years ago and the thoroughness of your presentation, I don't have any questions, and I would, in light of the hour, suggest that remember that what our real decision tonight is this a feasible project? So I think if you keep that in mind, any questions for clarification or further information should be addressed to the applicant now.
John Tower, is there any staff comments or?
Well, I certainly have comments. I mean, the first statement that I want to make is that I think that the array that we have on the parking garage, the Hillman garage, is very successful. Even though there were a couple of blips with regard to the design. Now that is visible. If you want to see it, you can from certain public ways. Duke of Gloucester Street being the primary view, but I have to say it's innocuous. It looks like a roof structure or a roof structure, which brings me into my actual question. And I mentioned this to Jim before. I asked why the parking areas hadn't been considered for canopy photovoltaic assemblies. That was just a question. It's not what's being proposed here, but I thought, okay, if there are issues of visibility on certain roofs, what about putting them in places where we're not trying to hide them and they might shade vehicles? So that was a major question for me. Other than that, I think that this is extremely thorough. I think it's thoughtful. I've walked the site. Certainly, you're going to see some of this. I don't. I'd like to see none of it. But we're at a stage with our climate and with the necessity of projects like this moving forward, that I think the small intrusions that this would make are acceptable to the guidelines. I think it works with the guidelines, with some possible exceptions on the Francis Scott Key entrance and conversation area. And I still haven't determined if those are really prominently within public views, just from a pedestrian standpoint, not so much from climbing McDowell Hall and looking down. The other thing is they're in patterns, so they add a kind of uniformity to the roof. And for that reason, because there isn't a lot of spacing between them, they do have, even if they're angled, they have a somewhat monolithic appearance. So I think that it's not unacceptable to look at something that's been added on top of a very nondescript flat roof. We just have to determine what its effect is going to be. And that's enough from me.
Thank you, John. Any of the commissioners have questions? Yes, Mary.
I just think you did a great job of showing all of the different possibilities and all of the different views. I guess in my mind, I'm thinking the whole part of the, can you see it from the third floor corner of this academic building or that dorm? That's a whole nother thing. Like, what can you see from a very specific inside of a building approach? And you've covered that. And, there's no way to not have it be seen from some internal space, which in my mind is kind of a very different thing than what does it look like outside. And you also did a great job of showing all the different views. As someone who is on St. John's campus almost every day, with my dogs, I think there are a few very critical views on the campus where it would be detrimental, and you've done a great job of showing all the different angles, most of them where I think are not very impactful, but at the upper campus, when you're walking down to the field and you're going down those stairs, that's really, in my opinion, like the most important overall feeling a person gets when they go to the St. John campus and you are on the upper level. So I wish there was a way that you could show just those main views where you're higher and looking over the whole campus.
Appreciate
Balloons.
that. I can do it. Balloons, yeah.
That's what balloons are for.
Yeah, I don't, and if there is either if you do that and it's like, oh, you can see this one right here, then I might be in favor of, removing one or two of the smaller, more forward-looking ones. But maybe you won't see those at all. I'm not concerned with the little minuscule views from this floor or that floor or from, behind the heating plant. But where are the most important critical views of the feeling a person gets of the beauty of the St. John campus?
So, but we do want, Jim, in certain areas, to have that, not necessarily balloons, but we would like you to put up something that's physically obvious, physical and obvious, so that the campus can be walked and we could take a look at it, and we could do it over maybe a couple of days.
Yep.
This is, as everyone knows, this is a landmark building. This is a very important building, and I think that Keslow Group did a very nice job with the renovation. There were a few things I disagreed with. I was voted down, but I'm over it, kind of. Anyway, I'm looking forward to determining what the actual effect is, and I'm not going to judge this on the basis of letting a small matter get in the way of the greater good. But it has to conform with guidelines.
Appreciate that.
I just wanted to say thank you for your presentation. It was very thorough. As a major fan of Richard Neutra, I think he would approve of this, and I think it is feasible. Thank you.
Thank you.
Cecil?
Yeah, I just wanted to, again, echo it's extremely helpful when every single question that that you could have is answered in a presentation. So thank you for that. I would say personally, I don't even care about the balloons 9 inches. I don't even know that would be a big difference. But obviously, I think that will be an important component, specifically to Mary's comment. From some of the very clear, prominent viewpoints. And if you did that and it was very prominent, maybe just take one row away. I don't know. I don't. Again, to John's point that you just made, I don't know that changes the project.
That is
worth noting.
Cecil, that is what I was thinking, and in an area where it became prominent, maybe it couldn't be in that spot, and it could be redistributed to another area.
But I personally, with the exception of having to actually walk down there or potentially see the balloons, I mean, from the pictures that you guys shared, I think this layout is great. So my only comment was just clarifying that it would only be done on flat roofs and nowhere else. And I don't think there's any plan or desire to do it anywhere else from the very thorough presentation. But if I don't know if that matters at all, but I thought that was an important notation. So that was it. And I do think it's feasible.
Appreciate it. We'll
Brendan?
be sure to address that as well.
What do you think, Brendan?
I can be brief. I can't imagine a more thoughtfully done or desperately necessary presentation. I think in particular, what I appreciated was your time at the very beginning, setting up exactly which regulations you were working from and possible other interpretations of those regulations. That's massively helpful. And I'm wondering if there's any way we can create a short course or a template for this for other applicants, because it's important, as Cecil pointed out, to anticipate questions and answer them. So thank you for the thoroughness of this proposal, but I just sort of can't imagine having any objections right now.
Thank you.
I think that you've heard from the commissioners, and we're unanimous in saying this is a feasible project. And I would emphasize again what Commissioner Bannon said, because I think that's the only thing that would make me change my opinion about this, is if all of a sudden you did that examination with something to give us a real sense of what could be visible from those key vantage points. And I think there's a solution, and a number of the commissioners have mentioned it, maybe just removing a few or repositioning a few panels. But overall, this was an excellent presentation, and convinced me that this is a feasible project.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Could I add one more thing? That I think this is important for everyone to know. We will not see this as in a public hearing until the Maryland Historic Trust has given at least conceptual approval. So, and obviously the architectural team's aware of that, but it won't advance to us until after Maryland Historic Trust has given its tacit approval.
Okay. All right. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Mr. Hall and your team. And we'll see you sometime in the future, I hope.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. I greatly appreciate your time.
All right.
Thank you.
all.
Motion to adjourn.
We do have a couple of more items on our agenda.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, you can't go that fast. I don't even go that fast. John, do you have any new violations and status of active violations you want to discuss with us?
Oh, well, have one violation on Pinckney Street. It's a bit painful because in the row of 6, or is it 7, of the original townhouses that are they're really iconic. They're extremely photogenic. It's very modest, simple housing, and they all had uniform doors with a transom above. And the applicant gave me a picture of the door with the transom, and I went by before, it's not approved, obviously, and they wanted to take out the transom and raise the door to 84 inches. And lo and behold, there was already an 84-inch door in with the transom out. So I'm requiring that transom be replaced. Now, it's unfortunate, but I haven't received any plans, and I've given it a stop work order.
Okay, thank you for being diligent. Anything else?
Well, do you want to talk about the appeal of the Maritime Welcome Center decision?
I will only to this extent that as information, of course, being the chair, I've been contacted by the leader of the application team, Ms. Fogarty, and by the Office of Law. And at this point, there has not been a formal presentation of our decision, a written decision. And so the city is at this time asking that the decision be made that we not it's not a timely appeal or challenge. Okay. And the city is trying to go back to the previous suit. I did attend court on a week ago, Monday, and observed the proceedings. The city is asking for a summary dismissal from Judge Malone because the plaintiff or complainant is not identified and that doesn't conform with Maryland law. So the judge, because of scheduling issues on the day of that hearing, hasn't issued his decision yet. If his decision upholds the city's position, then work can go forward. And the other matter is a whole different thing, and I don't quite know where that stands. I don't think the city has formalized its opinion to take its action because they don't want to do that until they feel that the complainant, HA, has made their case that they actually have something to proceed on. That's as best I can do as a non-attorney to try and explain it.
Right. So the commissions, I'm just going to explain for those who weren't on the commission. So the last year's decision, which was about a year ago, has been appealed. I think everyone knows. And the plaintiff in that case is identified as John Doe, and that's for the majority of the City Dock Park and renovation project. And then the other that we were referring to previously was the Maritime Welcome Center.
So one is kind of comprehensive and involves a lot of sort of non HPC regulations and laws. It's a broader legal issue. The complainant has also made statements that the city agreed to allow somebody to proceed anonymously. The city's position is there were never even any discussions of that moving forward, that approach being taken. So it's kind of a complicated thing that we don't really play a part in. The other, of course, we play a central part in, and it's not that I have been advised by the Office of Law, but it seems prudent to me that we not talk about it because it's kind of in this limbo position where if we made public comment or discussed it with members of outside the commission, that could create a whole other sequence of legal actions.
I think
Yeah, so
that's
it's
well
best-
said. Well,
Yeah. So, okay. I think then that concludes our business for this evening.
Motion to adjourn.
Is there a second?
I'll second it.
All right, motion to adjourn made and seconded. All in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Before you go, oh, wait a minute. I had it on the screen a second ago. For those that are interested, there's 9 minutes and 51 seconds left in the Maryland game, and Maryland is now behind by 12 points. At half, it was 2 points. So it's not looking real good. Anyway.
Hey, 10 points.
thanks
They
for the
just scored.
update.
Okay, enjoy